everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Exos Heroes. And today we're bringing you a comprehensive guide to Holy Dragon Ground. We posted this guide on Reddit a couple days ago, and it has gotten amazing reception by the community. And I think right now it's probably ranked number 9 on the all-time post list. So it's doing really well, and a lot of people found it very, very helpful. So we thought we'll bring this to YouTube as well in a video format. But before we jump into the details, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who watched our last episode of Summoning Saturday last week. It was the first video of ours that generated more than 500 views, which is not a lot for a lot of other YouTube channels, but it's a huge deal for us. So thank you for everyone who watched, who liked our videos, who left a comment. It means the whole world to us. And for everyone who's watching this video right now, don't forget to leave a like or comment if you do find this video helpful. As a very young YouTube channel, your support means a lot. And also, we're posting another summoning video later today as well, so feel free to check it out. We'll put the link in the descriptions down below. But with that being said, let's jump into this guide. Hopefully you guys will find this informative. We put a lot of time into this guide and try to put a lot of helpful visuals together. So without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about is just kind of the general idea of why the Holy Dragon Ground is very important. In our opinion, it's a big part of the game, and maybe it's more geared towards the late game than it is early, as the drops are often used for crafting fated weapons or to awaken weapons. It's very, very important to have these items and these drops in your inventory and have a build-up of them so that when you do get to the late game, you have the resources to really bring yourself to another level. For the early to mid-game players, maybe it's not as important, maybe the fact you won't feel it right away, but we highly recommend everyone to use their tickets every day, 3 times a day, and then get as much as you can. Just save those up. They'll come in handy one day, believe us. And like I said, everyone can participate in the Holy Dragon Ground 3 times a day, and each day the dragon changes its element. So starting on Monday, or actually starts, I think for most of us would be, late afternoon or early evening on Sunday and carries through most of Monday. It's light and dark element for the dragon, and it has the passive of Dragon Scale of Order. So we'll talk a little bit about the passive in just a little bit, but just keep those in mind. Okay, so on Monday it's light and dark, and on Tuesday the element is fire, and on Wednesday it's ice, Thursday is nature, Friday is machine, and weekend is neutral. But although it's neutral, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no mechanic to it. Actually, on the weekend, the dragon has a new passive called Dragon Scale of Chaos, and there's a special class of champions that we'll talk about in a little bit that's designed for that. So let's expand just a little bit on why the elements are important. Because dragon does have another passive which reduces the attack, defense, and HP of heroes that are not the same element. And that's why it's very important to keep in mind the element of the day, because you really do want to bring heroes of the same element, because otherwise you're significantly reducing your own survivability, you're significantly reducing your own damage output potential. So keep those in mind and make sure you bring as many heroes of the same element as possible. The next thing we want to talk about is the dragon's HP bar, and what we'll refer to as the phases of the dragon fight. So the first thing we want to talk about is that there are 4 HP bars at the moment, but actually you can only access the first 3. So the 4th phase is not yet available in-game. And each phase gradually ramp up in both total HP level, as well as in terms of activating certain different mechanics of the dragon. So the first phase, dragon has about 26,000 HP, and the drops is about 50 relics. When you get to phase 2, the dragon's total HP is about 60,000, and the drops is about 80 to 110. And lastly, when you get to phase 3, if you're able to completely take out the third HP bar, you have to go through about a little bit over 200,000 HP, and it drops up to 212 relics. So, as you can see, it's not easy to completely take out the dragon. And for most of the players out there, I think as far as you can go is probably the target for us right now, right? Like, I think phase 1 and phase 2 are reasonable targets for most players that are in the mid game. Once you're able to get some fated equipments and 6-star heroes, and maybe that's the time when you really should focus on trying to push through phase 3 and try to get as much relics as possible and to expand your equipment and weapon inventory. Another mechanic that we want to point out is that Dragon does have Guardian Stone as well. And the Guardian Stone matches the element of the day. So for example, Monday is fire, and the Dragon Guardian Stones are going to be fire. So another reason for you to bring heroes of the same element, because they will help you break those Guardian Stones. And Dragon comes with 10. So for each phase, it always has 10, and it resets at the beginning of the next phase. And what this means is, if you don't destroy all the Guardian Stones by the time you take out the HP bar, it still resets at the beginning of the next phase. So for example, if you take out 5, and during that time, you've already moved down to the next phase, guess what? It's going to reset back to 10. And if you want to activate the break mechanic, you still have to take out another 10 before you can get that effect. So keep that in mind. There's some mechanics which we will recommend in a little bit that'll help you break those Guardian Stones as fast as possible. For example, heroes with counter ability are very useful because when they get attacked, they'll counter the dragon and break another Guardian Stone if they do have the same element. Also, another mechanic that we want to point out is damage over time. Hero with damage over time or dot skills are very, very helpful as well, as those damage over time skills also helps to break Guardian Stones every turn they're procced. So when we're thinking about heroes, we really should prioritize heroes that has either damage over time skills or the counter ability to kind of maximize their potential at breaking the Guardian Stones and get those break effects on the dragon as soon as possible. Another mechanic that's important to point out is that while Dragon can be broken, when it does break, it still moves and attacks, so it's unlike heroes that get stunned, Dragon does not. But it does take 50% more damage. Also, the specific effects related to breaking the Guardian Stone also applies to Dragon. For example, breaking the machine, Guardian Stone will prolong the break status by 5 turns, right? That applies to just normal heroes, and it applies to dragons as well, so keep those in mind, as they will be very, very helpful as well in terms of how you maximize your champion squad. And lastly, let's take a quick look at the dragon skills. So the dragon has 5 different skills. 2 of them are passives. The first passive that dragon has is called Dragon Dignity. And what it does, as I mentioned earlier, it reduces attack, defense, and HP of heroes that are not of the same element. And that's why it's really, really important for us to bring heroes of the same element, because their effectiveness is significantly reduced when they're used on a day that they don't have matching elements. And also, starting from the 3rd HP bar or the 3rd phase, it also increases Dragon's attack each turn. So when you get to the 3rd HP bar, when you get to that 3rd phase, you really want to have high damage champion that can really burst it down as fast as possible, because trying to out-survive Dragon is simply very unlikely, as its attack just continue to ramp up over time. The second passive that Dragon has is Dragon Scale of Order, and this activates during the 2nd HP bar or phase 2. What it does is it reduces damage from heroes who doesn't have the Dragon Knight's Blessing passive. That's why it's also really important to bring heroes that has the Dragon Knight's Blessing passive, as they are going to be a lot more effective at doing damage to the dragon once you get to phase 2. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And in terms of active attacking skills, there are 3 of them. So let's start with the Raging Breath, which is a devastating attack. So what it does is it activates at the moment when each phase ends, or when you completely take out an HP bar. The power of this skill gets stronger each time, so by the time you get to the transition between the 2nd and 3rd phase, it does a lot of damage. One good thing about this is that the damage is somewhat reduced if you have another champion that have the Head Dragon Knight passive. But of course, as you probably know by now, the Head Dragon Knight passive only affects other heroes that have Dragon Knight's Blasting passive. So another reason why it's so important to have these heroes that's got the Dragon Knight's Blasting passive in with them. The second attack that Dragon has is called Dragon Roar. So this is kind of a basic ability that does AoE damage. During phase 3, this skill will start to reduce heroes' damage and silence them for 8 turns, and also reduces their mana. So it's really important to be able to withstand not only the damage of the skill, but also have heroes who can cleanse the silences off of your team, because otherwise your team are going to go through a prolonged period of time not able to use their damaging skills. And lastly, the final skill is called Dragon Strike, and this is a single target basic attack, very similar to a basic hero that we all have, just a basic attack, nothing really to it. And lastly, the final mechanic that we want to point out is the attack order. So Dragon doesn't have a set attack speed. Instead, Dragon moves on the every 4th turn. So whenever 3 of your hero moves, the next turn, Dragon will get his move. And it's always the case, regardless of how fast your team is. Even if you bring 10 really fast heroes, you're never going to have all 10 of them move before the Dragon gets his move, right? So it's always going to be 3, and then the Dragon, another 3 heroes, the Dragon again, and another 3 heroes, Dragons again. It's always going to be like that. And we'll talk a little bit more about this and why it's so important to keep in mind, because there are many ways that you can actually use this to your advantage, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Okay, so now with the mechanics explained, we want to talk a little bit about the equipment choices. So this is less relevant to players that are still in the early to mid game, because the equipments we're talking about here is really about having the Guardian Stone set effects. And in order to have the Guardian Stone set effects, you really have to have fated equipments to be able to do that. So those are simply not available to players that are in the early to mid game. If you're one of those players that are new to the game, make sure you focus your attention on just getting the right characters for the day, right? Leveling them up to as much as you can, enhance them, just do the basics and not worry too much about this. But for those of us who are in the late game, it's one thing to really look into as you try to maximize your team and try to be able to clear the dragon on a daily basis. So let's take a quick look at the different Guardian Stone set effects that we have. So the Flame set, which decreases final damage taken, which is good. The Frost set increases block. Nature set increases dodge. Machine set, it says that the game's tooltip says it provides heal per turn, but I've seen some gameplay from the Korean server that has debuff immunity actually, so I'm not entirely sure if the tooltip is accurate. So for those of you who have experience with the machine set, let us know exactly what it does. But if it is debuff immunity for 2 turns, I believe, or actually 2 debuff immunities, that's actually quite good. The next, the light set creates a barrier, and lastly, the dark set heals based on the damage taken. So overall, looking at all the different set effects, the light set stands out as one of the best because barriers are essentially additional HP. And why is this better than, let's say, the Frost set, which increases block, or Nature, which increases dodge? Because while you get increase to block and dodge, those are still things that, not as consistent. There's a chance that you activate it, there's a chance that you can dodge, but it's not the guarantee. Where the light set with its barrier, it's essentially additional HP that you have that you can use to mitigate the damage. Especially given that Dragon does its AoE damage, it's very useful to have that on your heroes and just have kind of the basic additional HP instead of having to rely on a certain chance. And another thing that's very useful is if the machine set does offer immunity to 2 debuffs, that's also very useful because if you remember, the Dragon Roar skill Once you get to phase 3, it reduces heroes' damage and silences them for 8 turns, which is really devastating. But if you do have the immunity for 2 debuffs, you're essentially immune to the silence, which is going to be extremely helpful, whether it's for your healers to heal up your team, or for your damage dealers to start doing the damage. So the machine set, if it does really bring the debuff immunity, it might be even better than the light set. But those are the 2 that really stand out. All the other sets are still good, taking less damage, increased block, increased dodge, and healing. Those are good, but obviously I think from a consistency perspective, they're not quite as consistent as either the machine set or the light set. With that being said, let's move on to hero recommendations. So the first group of heroes that we want to bring to your attention is what we call the must bring. And I hope you notice that we didn't call these the must-haves, because you can absolutely be successful at doing the Holy Dragon Grounds without these champions. But if you do have them, we highly recommend that you bring them, because they are very, very good for their respective roles, and it's hard to make an argument for someone to substitute in another hero for them. And some of these heroes they're just great, really. The likes of Bathory, Baraka, Garth, they're just great at the game in general, so why not have them? Why not max them out, right? So with that being said, let's take a look at why we're recommending these specific heroes. So first up is Bathory, and I think this is relatively easy to understand. As we all know, Bathory is probably the most sought after hero in the game. Very, very good at just every aspect of the game. High DPS, which is great. Also has a passive that prevents death for everyone on the team for 1 turn. Bathory has very high attack, so chances are she's going to apply that to just about everyone else on the team. Definitely worth to bring if you do have her. The second hero that we're recommending is Fate Court Rodley. The regular Rodley can also function in a similar capacity, just not as good. So what Fate Court Rodley brings is, obviously, he has pretty high DPS, but at the same time, he has a lot of utility as well. His passive provides a shield to the team that can help keeping the team alive for longer. Very good DPS potential with good utility, so definitely a must bring if you do have him. Next is Garth. Garth is great at Dragon, and he's one of those heroes that you can potentially bring him to every single one of your team, even if he doesn't have the matching element. And this is because his passive is just amazing at Dragon. So what his passive does is it boosts HP and defense of the team. And typically in other area of the game, this would only apply to the front line, but in Dragon, it's very important to remember that there is no front row, back row distinction, because there's really just one row of heroes. So for anyone who has a passive that applies to the front row or a passive that applies to the back row, it just gets applied to your entire team. So that means Garth is going to boost up the HP and defense of your whole team. And that is massive. It significantly increases your team's survivability, and there's not another hero that's as good at this as Garth. A potential replacement for Garth is Chatty. So Chatty also has a skill, I believe it's her A1, which provides a shield to all the backline heroes, and of course, in this case, that'll apply to your entire team. So also very good, but in terms of consistency and just the pure amount of damage mitigation you get, not as good as Garth's passive. But if you do have Chatty and not Garth, highly recommend bringing Chatty with you as well. In terms of healer, there are a few choices. And actually, the best healer that we believe that's currently in the game is actually Kaya, a rare 3-star hero. I mean, she is very, very good. She provides very consistent heal on both of her skills, the ability to remove debuff with every skills as well, and her passive. The only thing we would like to point out is that she does have a relatively base stats, which is expected because she's only a rare hero. Especially in comparison to some of the fated healers out there. But if you have good gear, if you're able to level her up, she is definitely worth bringing. And just because of how accessible she is, I believe everyone once you get to kind of the mid-game area, it's impossible that you don't have a Kaya with you, right? But otherwise, there are a couple other alternatives. So a couple other fated heroes that we think are good alternatives. One of them is Talia. Talia is a nature healer, which is good for, I believe, Thursday, the nature element, and you can use her in other days as well. And obviously, Anastasia is another very strong and popular healer out there. It's good at many areas of the game, so if you do have Anastasia, feel free to bring her as well. But for most of us out there, Kaya is one that we shouldn't sleep on. She is very, very good, and if you do have her, make sure that you build her up and get her into your team. And lastly, in kind of a supportive role, what we have left is Emma. Emma brings a few important elements. First of all, she has the Head Dragon Knight passive. And this is really, really important because with the Head Dragon Knight passive, it'll help you survive those huge Raging Breath attacks when the phases transition from one to another. Other than that, Emma also brings a very strong debuff as well. So with one of her skill, Emma is able to reduce the attack of the dragon by 57% of her attack. So if you do have good gear, if you do have her leveled up, she has the ability to really help you survive the dragon's attack by reducing its attack stats. So very, very useful. Brings the Head Dragon Knight passive and also adds utility, which helps you take less damage. So if you do have Emma, make sure you bring her. Otherwise, you have to look for other heroes that have the Head Dragon Knight passive. It's very important that at least one of your hero has that because it really does make a difference. So now, with the must-bring heroes out of the way, let's take a look at the specific recommended heroes for each day. So on Monday, it's Light and Dark Day. There are a few heroes here we're recommending, one of them being Adams, which is just a legendary. He has very good damage, especially if you have his Fate Core. He also have a counter ability, which as we mentioned before, is very good for breaking Guardian Stones, because every time the dragon attacks, he will counter and break another stone for you. So very, very useful. Definitely bring him if you do have him. The next one we have is Baelish. And Baelish is another very good option for Monday. He does bring the Dragon Knight Blessing passive, so he's going to be able to do quite an amount of damage during phase 2. And he also has a very low cost damage over time skill. And that's another great combination for breaking those Guardian Stones, especially if you can cast the skill on a consistent basis, which he does because it doesn't really require that much mana. So very, very good option. If you do have him, certainly bring him with you. And a few honorable mentions that we have, one is Farius, and also there's Liechtenstein. Both are Dragon Knights, so they do have the Dragon Knight Blessing passive. Both are defenders, so they're not going to be, high damage for you. And unfortunately, they don't have counter either. They're not quite as good at breaking the Guardian Stones either. So, in my opinion, not my first choice, but if you do have them and doesn't have a lot of other light or dark hero, feel free to add them to your lineup and see how it goes. Next up on Tuesday is the fire element. So obviously one of the best fire hero that you can bring is Xian. Especially if you have Fate Core Xian would be great. Xian, like we mentioned, has the counter passive. Hopefully everyone knows that by now. And counter is very, very useful at breaking the Guardian Stone. If you do have his Fate Core, then obviously, he becomes a very, very good champion that brings additional damage and a shield as well. So good survivability, good damage potential, and good at breaking Guardian Stones. So why not? If you have him, definitely have him in your team. Next up is Rachel, and Rachel is very similar to Xian, has the counter passive, very good base speed. Obviously, as a fated hero, has tremendous DPS potential, so similar to Xian, similar role, definitely bring him. And then we have Maggie. So Maggie has the Dragon Knight Blessing passive, so she is going to be really good in this area. Her damage potential is very high, but her speed is a little bit low. But I think this is actually not an issue, as we'll discover a little bit later. Having fast speed doesn't actually give you a lot of benefit in Dragon because of the fixed attack order that Dragon has. So her being a little bit slower doesn't hurt her as much as you would imagine. And lastly, obviously, we've got a few honorable mentions here as well. We have Otar, we have Brooke, and Sabrina. All of them are good heroes to bring. All of them have counter passive, so they're going to be good at breaking the Guardian Stones for you. And Sabrina also has pretty good damage herself as well. It's worth mentioning that Brooke has the Dragon Hunter passive, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, but Dragon Hunter passive is essentially the counter to the Dragon Scale of Chaos, which occurs during weekend. So he is going to be great for the Saturday and Sunday rounds if you do have him. But also you can use him on Tuesdays when the fire element comes up, because he does bring that counter passive and can deal out some good damage. And Wednesday we have Frost element, and here we have a few heroes. The first up is Albelia. So she has a team-wide defense buff, which is really good. Really helps your team to survive. And also she brings the debuff remove, as we mentioned during third phase. This is going to be really important, as you really want to get rid of those silences off of your team. So having that debuff remove is great, especially if you have a machine set equipment. Try to put it on her so she can get those debuff immunity, which then will allow her to use her skill and remove the debuff from your team. So very good for Wednesday. If you do have her, make sure you bring her. And in terms of DPS, Kirina is one of the best. So she's got the Dragon Hunter Blessing. So as we mentioned earlier, similar to Brooke, Dragon Hunter Blessing is going to be huge for weekend rounds. But also during weekdays, especially on Wednesday when you have the Frost element, she's going to be very useful as well. And her attack just has amazing scaling. Her A2, which scales at 840% of attack, it's going to do huge damage. I have her in my team, and there are days where she can essentially take out more than half of Dragon's HP during phase 2 just by herself. It's absolutely insane. So if you do have her, gear her up and bring her with you. And function in a similar role is Reed Murray. She brings great Guardian Stone breaking ability with her counter passive. Her Fate Core also offers additional protection for her teammates, so very good. Make sure you bring her along. And lastly, there's Valentina, and she's another kind of a Guardian Stone specialist, as she has dot damage on her skill 1 and 2, so both of those skills can break the Guardian Stones of the dragon really fast. And obviously, she's a fated hero, right? Out of all the ones that we're recommending, she's the only fated hero of this group. So she's going to have better base stats than, some of the other heroes that we mentioned here. So that just gives her natural damage and natural added survivability. So if you have her, make sure you bring her. Alright, with that being said, let's move on to Thursday. So Thursday is going to be the nature element. And obviously, top of the list, Fate Core Rira. If you have her, she is a no-brainer. Amazing DPS potential, and her A1 allows her to bring some survivability with her. There are many people out there have been able to essentially gear her up and use her to pretty much solo dragons. So she is absolutely amazing. Especially if you have Battery, then pairing them together is going to just bring additional damage because of the Tranquil passive and with Rira's ability, which allows her to do more damage based on number of mana counts on your team. If you think about it, to get to 10 mana is relatively easy when you have 10 heroes out there, right? You only need 1 on each person to be able to proc that passive. So Rira, fantastic hero for Thursday. And also on weekends, if you do have Battery, pair them together and just let them go to work. And next up, Fate Core Tantalo is also a very useful hero for Thursday nature. Team-wide increase attack buff is very useful. It really helps, especially during phase 3 when it's a race against the clock and you're trying to burst the dragon down as fast as possible. That increased attack buff to your entire team is huge. And also, he's another hero that has the Dragon Hunter Blessing debuff, and that's also very useful as well. So you can bring him on Thursday, but also, he's a candidate for the weekend run as well. Top tier, very good support. And lastly, Estard. So Estard is kind of the second choice DPS out there if you don't have Fit Core Rira. She is very good, very similar to Karina on Wednesday. High damage scale with 840% scaling on her A2, but she doesn't have the Dragon Hunter blessing, so good for Thursday, not as useful on weekend. And then on Friday, let's take a look at Machine Element here. So Machine Element, couple of good DPS to keep in mind. One is Baraka, another one is Jing. Neither of them are Dragon Hunters, neither of them has the Dragon Knight passive, but they are both fated heroes with fantastic scaling. So if you do have one of them or both of them, make sure you bring them. They're going to do a lot of work for you. And then next we have Wulong. And Wulong is very good, especially if you pair him with Bathory, because once you're able to pair him with Bathory, he can break up to 3 stones randomly. He's essentially a Guardian Stone breaking specialist. Very, very useful. Not so much if you only have him, because he is very slow. He's going to move probably last or second to last on your team, depending on what type of hero that you have. So not very useful by himself. If you do have Bathory though, make sure you bring him. On Friday, it's a no-brainer. Then next up, we have Yao. Yao, similar to Tantalo in a way that she brings a team-wide attack buff, which is great, but she also has good damage herself. Her A2 does a lot of damage. She's not a Dragon Hunter or Dragon Knight, so her damage will fall off a little bit as you continue to progress through Phase 2 and Phase 3. But her team-wide attack buff really makes up for that, so if you have her, make sure you bring her along with you. And lastly, as an honorable mention, we have Diva. She's very good. She also has a Dragon Hunter passive, so not only will she be useful for Friday, she's also a candidate for the weekend as well. And then lastly, we want to talk about the weekend. So the weekend dragon doesn't have a specific element, so that also means it doesn't have any Guardian Stones either. So you won't be able to trigger the break effect, but the weekend dragons are a little bit weaker than the weekdays. That's kind of Dev's way to kind of compensate for that. But as we mentioned earlier, instead of having the dragon scale of order passive, which is countered by the Dragon Knight blessing passive on your heroes, the weekend dragon has the Dragon Knight of chaos passive, and there's a specific group of heroes that counters that, which are the heroes that have the Dragon Hunter passive. And we've already pointed out some of these heroes earlier, but just as a review, there's Diva, Brooke, Sharpay is another one, and then there's Karina. So keep these heroes in mind as you try to clear the weekend dragons, as they will be your primary damage source during those times. Alright, so lastly we want to talk just a little bit about team building. It is really important to have a balance of damage and support in a dragon hunting team. It is also important to keep in mind the balance of speed between your heroes. Remember, dragon moves on every 4th turn, so whenever 3 of your hero gets their move, dragon will move on the next turn. Therefore, the more high-speed DPS you bring, the more times dragon attacks you before your support gets to move. So if a team has too many high-speed DPS, it will end up pushing your healers back too far down the attacking order, and as a result, they won't be able to heal as often as possible. So often when you do that, you end up running the risk of going into a new phase at low HP and getting wiped out by the dragon's Raging Breath ability. Therefore, really important to make sure you have a balance between different speeds, and at times it's actually beneficial to bring some attacking heroes that have relatively lower speed, just to make sure that your healers gets enough moves. In terms of overall team comp, there are a couple of things we want to point out. So first, let's look at kind of the standard recommended team comp. And this is going to be a team comp that's made up of 10 heroes. So we're recommending that you bring 2 defense heroes. In this case, Garth and Chetty are first choice, as they do bring significant survivability to your team and has AoE buffs to your entire team, which is very, very good. And we're recommending that you bring 3 supports. Obviously, Ammon is one of the top supports that we're recommending. With a Head Dragon Knight passive, it's great. Anastasia and Kaya, as well as Talia, are also very, very good as they fulfill the role of healers. But if you do have other heroes, you can substitute them in as well, depending on their element. And lastly, the remaining 5 spots should be filled with DPS heroes. Obviously, Bathory and Rutley are going to be top of the list. If you do have them, they should be a staple of your team. And the last three will vary depending on the element of the day. So on the fire day that we're showing here, we're recommending to bring Xian, Maggie, and Rachel. But obviously, if it's Wednesday and it's Frost, Karina, Reed Mary, and Valentina can be substituted in. So just keep in mind the element of the day and make sure you bring the corresponding heroes into your lineup. But this is kind of a standard 10-man team. But we actually want to bring up another idea that less is more when it comes to dragon hunting. And what we mean is, don't be afraid to not bring the full team. I think a lot of us who started out, we want to really make sure that we have the entire team. We believe, that brings the most damage. And actually, in reality, that's not the case. And let me tell you why. Many of us are still new to the game and probably don't have all that many heroes built out. And certainly not enough to field a full team of maxed out heroes every single day on, different elements. So if that's the case, don't be afraid to field a dragon hunting team that has less than 10 men. Because if you're forcing yourself to bring a lot of weak heroes with you, what they end up doing is they're going to push back the attack order of your stronger heroes and making them move less often than they normally would if you don't have those spots filled. And we'll demonstrate this on the next slide. So here we're looking at a 10 hero move order and then the 6 hero move order. So let's imagine the 10 hero move order here that we have. Imagine if our numbers 7, 8, and 9 are all weaker than our 1 through 6. So what that means is, we have 6 very, very strong heroes, and then we're trying to fill the rest of the team with weaker heroes. And what it does is, if we're looking at Rachel, which is marked as number 1 here, so he's going to get a first move, and he will not move again until essentially all of your 10 heroes has moved, and the dragon has moved 3 times. But now if we look at our 6 hero move order, our first hero now gets her second move after just only 2 dragon attacks. So what this is showing is that when you bring less heroes, you actually get to have those characters move a lot more frequently than you would if you do bring all 10 heroes. So if you don't have 10 good heroes, there's no reason to force yourself to have a full team. Right, if you have a couple of weaker heroes, just drop them and make sure that the top 8 or top 7 or even the top 6 heroes that you bring get as many moves as they possibly can in between those dragon attacks, and that actually will benefit you in the long run. Believe me, I have much better results when I run a 7 hero team on Thursday during the nature element than I do when I bring a 10-man team. It's because I can get those 7 heroes to move much more frequently than when I have a full team lined up and their attack order getting pushed back by other weaker heroes that doesn't really contribute to the overall damage. So with that being said, that's all for us today. Hopefully you found this guide helpful. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And if you have other areas of the game that you would like us to help you out with, leave those ideas in the comment section down below. We would love to look into those and put some guides together for you. But otherwise, happy 4th of July everyone, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye bye.